Congress is supposed to represent the people, uphold the Constitution, and serve as a check on power. But behind the marble halls and solemn oaths lies a darker history of corruption, sex scandals, financial crimes, and betrayals that would make any thriller writer jealous. Today you're going to discover the biggest scandals that have rocked the United States Congress, from the earliest days of the Republic to the modern era. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll see why some say Congress has always had a problem with accountability. Make sure to hit that subscribe button because we're diving deep into stories they don't teach in civics class. Let's start with one of the earliest bombshells, the Yazoo land scandal of the 1790s. Georgia legislators took massive bribes to sell millions of acres of public land to private companies at ridiculously low prices. When the public found out, the outrage was so intense that the next legislature literally burned the corrupt law in a public ceremony. This wasn't just local corruption, it reached all the way to Congress members who had invested in the scheme. The Supreme Court eventually had to step in, and the scandal showed Americans that their representatives could be bought almost from day one. Fast forward to 1873 and the Credit Mobilier scandal, one of the most explosive corruption cases in American history. Union Pacific Railroad created a fake construction company called Credit Mobilier and used it to funnel government money into the pockets of company executives and politicians. Congressmen received shares of stock as bribes to look the other way while the railroad companies robbed the treasury. When the New York Sun exposed the scheme, it implicated major figures including Vice President Schuyler Colfax and future President James Garfield. This scandal showed how corporations and politicians could work together to steal public money on a massive scale. Then came the Teapot Dome scandal in the 1920s. While this primarily involved the executive branch, several Congress members were caught up in the oil lease bribery scheme that saw Interior Secretary Albert Fall go to prison. The scandal revealed how oil companies could buy access to public resources through payoffs to government officials, a pattern that would repeat throughout the century. Jump to 1972 and we hit Abscam, an FBI sting operation that caught 7 members of Congress on camera accepting bribes from fake Arab sheiks. One congressman literally said, "I've got larceny in my blood," while stuffing cash into his pockets. The FBI had set up an elaborate fake scenario where undercover agents posed as wealthy foreigners offering money in exchange for political favors. The grainy videos of congressmen taking envelopes full of cash became a cultural moment, showing the American public exactly how corruption worked. If you're enjoying these shocking stories, smash that like button and let's keep going. The 1980s brought us the Keating 5 scandal, where 5 senators were accused of improperly intervening with federal regulators on behalf of Charles Keating, the chairman of Lincoln Savings and Loan. Keating had made substantial donations to their campaigns, and when his bank failed, it cost taxpayers over $3 billion. One of those 5 senators was John McCain, who later called it the worst mistake of my life. The scandal highlighted how campaign contributions could influence senators to pressure regulators and ignore financial crimes. The 1990s saw the House banking scandal, where it was revealed that 450 members of Congress had overdrawn their accounts at the House Bank with no penalties. While not technically illegal since it was an internal institution, the public was outraged that congressmen could bounce checks without consequences while regular Americans faced fees and penalties. The scandal contributed to massive turnover in the 1992 elections as voters threw out dozens of incumbents. Then we get to one of the most memorable modern scandals, the Mark Foley case in 2006. Representative Foley, who ironically chaired the House caucus on missing and exploited children, was caught sending sexually explicit messages to teenage congressional pages. When the scandal broke, it was revealed that Republican leadership had known about Foley's behavior for months but did nothing. The cover-up was almost worse than the crime itself, showing how Congress protected its own even when minors were involved. Around the same time, lobbyist Jack Abramoff was at the center of a massive corruption scheme that brought down multiple members of Congress. Abramoff bribed congressmen with luxury trips, expensive meals, and campaign contributions in exchange for favorable legislation. Representative Bob Ney went to prison. Tom DeLay, the powerful House Majority Leader, was forced to resign. The scandal exposed a culture where lobbyists essentially owned certain politicians, writing legislation and directing votes in exchange for money and perks. The 2000s continued the tradition of congressional scandal. In 2005, Representative Randy Duke Cunningham admitted to taking $2.4 million in bribes from defense contractors in exchange for steering government contracts their way. He literally had a bribe menu, showing how much money he needed for different favors. He went to prison for 8 years, but the scandal raised serious questions about how defense spending and military contracts were influenced by corruption. Then there's the insider trading scandal that rocked Congress in the early 2010s. A 60 Minutes investigation revealed that members of Congress were legally allowed to trade stocks based on insider information they learned through their congressional duties. They could sit in classified briefings about economic policy, then immediately buy or sell stocks that would be affected by that policy. This wasn't technically illegal until the Stock Act was passed in 2012, but even that law has been weakened since. The scandal showed that Congress had created a system where they could legally enrich themselves using information unavailable to regular citizens. More recently, we saw multiple scandals during the Trump era and beyond. Representative Duncan Hunter and his wife were indicted for using $250,000 in campaign funds for personal expenses, including vacations, video games, and even flying their pet rabbit across the country. He initially blamed his wife, then eventually pleaded guilty and went to prison. The shamelessness of using donor money for a pet rabbit somehow captured the absurdity of congressional corruption. Representative Chris Collins became the first sitting congressman to endorse Donald Trump, then became one of the first to go to prison during his presidency, convicted of insider trading. Collins learned that a pharmaceutical company was about to fail its drug trial and immediately called his son to tell him to sell the stock before the public found out. His son made calls from the White House lawn during a congressional picnic. The image of corruption happening literally at a government event while children played nearby was almost too perfect. George Santos deserves special mention as perhaps the most brazen fraudster ever elected to Congress. Nearly everything on his resume was a lie. His education, his work history, his religion, his grandmother's Holocaust survival, his mother's death in 9/11, even his volleyball career. He fabricated an entire life story to get elected, then used campaign funds for personal luxuries including Botox and OnlyFans subscriptions. He was finally expelled from Congress in 2023, only the sixth person ever expelled from the House. His scandal wasn't just corruption, it was a complete con job that somehow worked long enough to get him elected. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something you need to hear. Many of these scandals share common patterns. First, there's usually a long period where colleagues know about the misconduct but stay silent to protect their party or their own interests. Second, the initial punishment is often minimal until media pressure becomes too intense to ignore. Third, the systems supposedly designed to prevent corruption are often the weakest and most easily bypassed. And fourth, voters have incredibly short memories. Districts have re-elected scandal-plagued members multiple times. The January 6th Capitol attack also revealed potential congressional involvement that's still being investigated. Some members allegedly gave reconnaissance tours to rioters the day before the attack. Others allegedly coordinated with organizers. The full story is still unfolding, but it represents a different kind of scandal. Not personal enrichment, but potential involvement in an attempt to overturn an election. If you've made it this far, you clearly care about accountability and truth. Hit that subscribe button right now because we're building a community that refuses to accept corruption as normal. Turn on notifications so you never miss when we expose the next scandal. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Congressional scandals aren't just about bad apples. They reveal systemic problems. Congress investigates itself, writes its own ethics rules, and rarely punishes its members severely. There's no independent oversight body with real power. Members can delay investigations until after elections, can refuse to cooperate with ethics probes, and can often avoid legal consequences entirely by resigning before formal punishment. The real question isn't whether Congress has scandals, it's whether Americans care enough to demand real reform. Term limits, independent ethics enforcement, bans on stock trading, transparent campaign finance, criminal penalties for corruption that actually get enforced. These solutions exist, but Congress will never vote to restrict its own power unless voters make them.